wonderful study session together. So, good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming together to join together in the study of Torah and the sharing of our insights and conversations with one another. I'm just so impressed that we have so many people already participating this evening. I know this is an evening where we fraught with anticipation about coming to a resolution about presidential election of 2020. So it's wonderful that we've all come together. I hope that some of what we do together as well as learn together will provide us good nourishment for the days ahead of coming together as a nation and creating a future for ourselves, regardless of who it is that wins the presidential election. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming together. With that, what we are going to be reading from Parshat Vayera, which begins with chapter 18 in the book of Genesis with verse 1. If you'd like to turn to that now. And then I'll invite everyone to go ahead and unmute, and we can say our blessing together, and then we will share in the reading of our portion. So once again, we are in the book of Genesis, chapter 18, verse 1. And so together, let's recite our blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam
asher kirtzonu mitzvotav tivanu la'asot b'divrei Torah.
Thank you, God, for this opportunity of coming together, immersing ourselves in this text of Torah, allowing us to immerse ourselves in these relationships with one another. We also call Torah and sharing with one another our insights, our perspectives, and our voices. And together we grow and grow Torah that way. So once again, we are in Parshat Vayera, chapter 18, the book of Genesis, verse 1. Let me share with you the opening verses, and then I'll invite each one of you to have an opportunity to share some verses as well. Adonai appeared to him by the terebinths of Mamre. He was sitting at the entrance of the tent as the day grew hot. Looking up, he saw 3 men standing near him. As soon as he saw them, he ran from the entrance of the tent to greet them, and bowing to the ground, he said, "My lords, if it please you, do not go on past your servant. Let a little water be brought, bathe your feet, and recline under the tree. And let me fetch a morsel of bread that you may refresh yourself. Then go on, seeing that you have come your servant's way." They replied, "Do as you have said." Abraham hastened into the tent to Sarah and said, "Quick, 3 seahs of choice flour, knead and make cakes." Then Abraham ran to the herd, took a calf, tender and choice, and gave it to a servant boy who hastened to prepare it. He took curds and milk and the calf that had been prepared and set these before them, and he waited on them under the tree as they ate. They said to him, "Where is your wife, Sarah?" And he replied, "There, in the tent." Then one said, "I will return to you next year, and your wife, Sarah, will have a son." Sarah was listening at the entrance of the tent, which was behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in years. Sarah had stopped having the periods of women, and Sarah laughed to herself, saying, "Now that I am withered, am I to have enjoyment with my husband so old?" Then Adonai said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh, saying, 'Shall I in truth bear a child, old as I am? Is anything too wondrous for Adonai? I shall return to you at the same season next year, and Sarah shall have a son." Sarah lied, saying, "I did not laugh," for she was frightened. But God replied, "You did laugh. We're now on verse 16. And Margot, would you like to read a little bit?
Sure.
Chapter 18, verse 16.
Right. The men set out from there and looked down toward Sodom, Abraham walking with them to see them off. Now the Lord had said, "Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? Since Abraham is to become a great and populous nation, and all the nations of the earth are to bless themselves by him. For I have singled him out that he may instruct his children and his posterity to keep the ways of the Lord by doing what is just and right, in order that the Lord may bring about for Abraham what he has promised him." Then the Lord said, "The outrage of Sodom and Gomorrah is so great, their sin is so grave. I will go down and see whether they have acted altogether according to the outcry that has reached me. If not, I will take note."
Thank you, Margot. And then Jackie and Tom, would you like to unmute and read some verses?
The men now turned away and went towards Sodom, while Abraham remained standing before Adonai. Abraham then came forward and said, "Will you indeed sweep away the innocent along with the wicked? Suppose there are 50 innocent in the city. Will you indeed sweep away the place and not spare it for the sake of the 50 innocent who are in its midst? Far be it from you to do such a thing, killing innocent and wicked alike, so that the innocent and the wicked suffer the same fate. Far be it from you. Must not the judge of all the earth do justly?" The Eternal said, "If I find 50 innocent people in Sodom, I will pardon the whole place for their sake." Again, Abraham spoke, "Look now, let me undertake to speak up to my Lord, though I am but dust and ashes. What if the 50 innocent are 5 short? Will you destroy the whole city because of 5? Adonai answered, "If I find 45 there, I will not destroy it." Once more, Abraham spoke up, "What if 40 are found there?" And God answered, "For the sake of the 40, I will not do it." Then he said, "Do not be angry, my Lord, and let me speak. What if 30 are found there? If I find 30 there," said Adonai, "I will not do it." And Abraham said, "Look now, let me undertake to speak up before my Lord. What if 20 are found there?" And God said, "For the sake of the 20, I will not destroy it."
Then Abraham said, "Let not my Lord be angry, and let me speak up one last time. What if 10 are found there?" And God said, "For the sake of the 10, I will not destroy it." Then, done speaking to Abraham, the Eternal departed, and Abraham returned to his place. That evening, the 2 emissaries came to Sodom, where Lot was sitting at the Sodom gate. Seeing them, Lot got up to greet them, and bowing all the way to the ground, he said, "Come now, my lords, turn to your servant's house, stay overnight and wash your feet. When you get up, you can go on your way." "No," they said, "we'll stay the night in the open." So he pressed them. However, they followed him and entered his house, where he had made them a festive meal, baked unleavened bread, and they ate. Then they had to lie down when the townspeople, the people of Sodom, young and old alike, all the people from every side gathered around the house, called to Lot, saying, "Where are your men who came to you tonight? Bring them out so we can have them." Lot went out to the entrance and shut the door behind him. He said, "Please, brothers, do no evil. Look, I have 2 daughters who have never been intimate with a man. Let me bring them out to you and do with them as you please. But do nothing to these men, for they have come under the shelter of my roof."
Thank you, Tom. And let me ask Jim and Peggy, would you like to read beginning, I believe we're now at verse 9, chapter 18.
Okay. But they said, "Stand back." They said, came here as an alien, and already he acts the ruler. Excuse me. Now we will deal worse with you than with them. And they pressed hard against the person of Lot and moved forward to break the door. But the men stretched out their hands and pulled Lot into the house with them and shut the door. And the people who were at the entrance of the house, young and old, they struck with blinding light so that they were helpless to find the entrance. Then the men said to Lot, "Whom else have you here? Sons-in-laws, your sons and daughters, or anyone else that you have in the city, bring them out of the place. For we are about to destroy this place, because the outcry against them before Adonai has become so great that Adonai has sent us to destroy it." So Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-laws who had married his daughters and said, "Up, get out of this place, for Adonai is about to destroy the city." But he seemed to his sons-in-laws as one who jests. Do you want to do the next one?
As dawn broke, the angels urged Lot on, saying, "Up, take your wife and your 2 remaining daughters, lest you be swept away because of the iniquity of the city." Still he delayed. So the men seized his hand and the hands of his wife and his 2 daughters in Adonai's mercy on him, and brought him out and left him outside the city. When they had brought them outside, one said, "Flee for your life. Do not look behind you, nor stop anywhere in the plain. Flee to the hills, lest you be swept away." But Lot said to them, "Oh no, my Lord, you have been so gracious to your servant and have already shown me so much kindness in order to save my life. But I cannot flee to the hills, lest the disaster overtake me and I die. Look, that town there is near enough to flee to. It is such a little place. Let me flee there. It is such a little place, and let my life be saved." He replied, "Very well, I will grant you this favor too, and I will not annihilate the town on which you have spoken. Hurry, flee there, for I cannot do anything until you arrive there." Hence the town came to be called Zorah. So
Thank you, Jim. And Wayne, would you like to unmute and read beginning at verse 23?
Yes, thank you. The sun was risen upon the earth when Lot came into Zoar. Then the Eternal caused to rain upon Sodom and upon Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Eternal out of heaven. And he overthrew those cities and all the district and all the inhabitants of the city and the growth of the ground. But his wife looked back from behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. And Abraham rose early in the morning to the place where he had stood before the Eternal. And he glanced towards Sodom and Gomorrah, and towards all the face of the land of the district, and beheld, and lo, the vapor of the earth went up as the vapor of a furnace. And it came to pass, when God destroyed the cities of the district, that God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow, when he overthrew the cities in which Lot abode.
Thank you, Wayne. And Susan and David, would you like to begin reading at verse 30 of chapter 19?
Okay. And Lot went up from Zoar and lived in the mountain, and his 2 daughters with him, because he feared to live in Zoar. And he lived in a cave, he and his 2 daughters. And the firstborn said to the younger one, "Our father is old, and there's no man in the earth to come and take us in the way of all the earth. Come on, let's make our father drink wine, and let's lie with him, and make seed live from our father." And they made their father drink wine in that night, and the firstborn came and lay with her father. And he did not know of her lying down and her getting up. And it was on the next day, and the firstborn said to the younger one, "Here, I lay with my father last night. Let's make him drink wine tonight as well, and you come and lie with him, and will make seed live from our father. And they made their father drink wine in that night as well. And the younger one got up and lay with him, and he did not know of her lying down and her getting up. And Lot's 2 daughters became pregnant by their father. And the firstborn gave birth to a son and called his name Moab. He is the father of Moab to this day. And the younger one, she too gave birth to a son and called his name Ben-Ami. And he is the father of the children of Ammon to this day. Keep going.
Unless Susan would like to read? No, okay. Well, David, let me then invite Dave Lieb, if he'd like to read beginning at the start of chapter 20.
Abraham journeyed from there to the region of the Negev and settled between Kadesh and Shur while he was sojourning in Gerar. Abraham said of Sarah, his wife, "She is my sister." So King Abimelech of Gerar had Sarah brought to him. But God came to Abimelech in a dream by night and said to him, "You are to die because of the woman that you have taken, for she is a married woman." Now Abimelech had not approached her. He said, "O my lord, will you slay people even though innocent?" He himself said to me, "She is my sister," and she also said, "He is my brother." When did I say this? My heart was blameless and my hands were clean. And God said to him in a dream, "I knew that you did this with a blameless heart, so I kept you from sinning against me. That's why I did not let you touch her. Therefore, restore the man's wife, since he is a prophet. He will intercede for you to save your life. If you fail to restore her, know that you shall die, you and all that are yours."
Thank you, Dave.
Okay.
And Steve, would you like to unmute and read a little bit beginning at verse 8 of chapter 20?
Sure. When Abimelech woke up early in the morning, he summoned all his retainers and drummed the whole story into their ears, and they became filled with fear. He then summoned Abraham and said to him, "What have you done to us? How had I sinned against you that you brought a great sin upon me and my kingdom? You did things to me that should not be done." Abimelech said to Abraham, "What were you thinking of that you did this?" Abraham replied, "I thought, there is no fear in God at all in this place, and they will kill me for my wife. And as a matter of fact, she is my sister, my father's daughter, though not my mother's daughter, so she became my wife. And when God made me wander from my father's house, I said to her, 'Do this kindness for me. Wherever we go, say of me, he is my brother.'" Let's go on.
Let me invite Richard Kramer, if you'd like to read beginning at verse 14 of chapter 20.
Yes, thank you. Abimelech took sheep and oxen and male and female slaves and gave them to Abraham, and he restored his wife Sarah to him. And Abimelech said, "Here, my land is before you, settle wherever you please." And Sarah, he said, "I herewith give your brother 1,000 pieces of silver. This will serve you as a vindication before all who are with you, and you are cleared before everyone." Abraham then prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech and his wife and his slave girls, so they bore children. And the Lord had closed fast every womb of the household of Abimelech because of Sarah, the wife of Abraham. The Lord took note of Sarah, and as he promised, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had spoken. Sarah conceived and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the set time of which God had spoken. Abraham gave his newborn son, whom Sarah had bore him, the name of Isaac. And when his son Isaac was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him as God had commanded him. Now Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him, and Sarah said, "God has brought me laughter. Everyone who hears will laugh with me." And she added, Who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would suckle children? Yet I have borne a son in his old age. The child grew up and was weaned, and Abraham held a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned.
Thank you, Richard. And Jay, would you like to unmute and read a little bit, beginning at verse 9?
Thank you. The child grew up. Oh, wait. Okay. Sarah saw the son whom Hagar and the Egyptian had borne to Abraham playing. She said to Abraham, "Cast out that slave woman and her son, for the son of that slave shall not share in the inheritance with my son Yitzhak." The matter distressed Abraham greatly, for it concerned a son of his. But God said to Abraham, "Do not be distressed over the boy or your slave. Whatever Sarah tells you, do as she says, for it is through Isaac that offspring shall be continued for you. As for the son of the slave woman, I will make a nation of him too, for he is your seed." Early next morning, Abraham took some bread and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. He placed them over her shoulder together with the child and sent her away. And she wandered about in the wilderness of Beersheba. When the water was gone from the skin, she left the child under one of the bushes and went and sat down at a distance, a bow shot away, for she thought, "Let me not look on as the child dies." And sitting thus afar, she burst into tears.
Thank you. Thank you, Jay. And then Robin, would you like to unmute and begin reading at verse 17? You'll have to unmute, Robin.
Thought I did.
Thank you.
Okay. God heard the boy's cry, and from heaven an angel of God called to Hagar and said, "What is troubling you, Hagar? Have no fear, for God has heard the cry of the lad where he is. Get up, lift the boy, and hold him with your hand, for I am going to make of him a great nation." God then opened her eyes, and she saw a well. She went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy to drink. God was with the boy, and he grew up. He lived in the wilderness and became a bowman. He lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took him a wife from the land of Egypt. At that time, Abimelech and Pichol, the commander of his army, said to Abraham, "God is with you in all that you do. Swear to me now that you will not be false to me, my progeny, or my posterity. Do me and the land in which you have been staying as much kindness as I have done to you." Abraham replied, "I will swear."
Okay, and then let me invite Justin, would you like to begin reading?
Verse 26. And Abimelech said, "I do not know who did this thing, neither did you tell me, nor did I hear of it until today." Is this where? And Abraham took flocks and cattle and gave them to Abimelech, and they both formed a covenant. And Abraham placed 7 ewe lambs by themselves. And Abimelech said to Abraham, "What are these 7 ewe lambs which you have placed by themselves?" And he said, "For these 7 ewe lambs you shall take from my hand, in order that it be to me for a witness that I dug this well." Therefore he named that place Beersheba, for there they both swore. And they formed a covenant in Beersheba, and Abimelech and Pichol, his general, arose, and they returned to the land of the Philistines. And he planted an Ishel in Beersheba, and he called there in the name of the Lord, the God of the world. And Abraham dwelt in the land of the Philistines for many days.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Justin. And Gary, would you like to begin reading at the very start of chapter 22?
Sometime afterward, God put Abraham to the test. He said to him, Abraham, and he answered, Here I am. And he said, Take your sons, your favored one, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering, as one of the highs that I will point out to you. So early next morning, Abraham saddled his ass and took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. He split the wood for the burnt offering, and he set out for the place of which God had told him. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up, and he saw the place from afar. Then Abraham said to his servants, You stay here with the ass. The boy and I will go up there. We will worship, and we will return to you. Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and put it on his son Isaac. He himself took the firestone and the knife, and the 2 walked off together. Then Isaac said to his father Abraham, Father, he and I are off together. Or Father, and he answered, Yes, my son. And he said, Here are the firestone and the wood, but where are the sheep for the burnt offering? And Abraham said, God will see to the sheep for his burnt offering, my son. And the 2 of them walked on together. They arrived at the place on which God had told him. Abraham built an altar there. He laid out the wood. He bound his son Isaac. He laid him on the altar on top of the wood. And Abraham picked up a knife to slay his son. Then the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven, Abraham, Abraham. And he answered, Here I am. And he said, Do not raise your hand against the boy or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son and your favored one from me. When Abraham looked up, his eye fell upon Ram. When his eye fell upon Ram, caught in the thicket by his horns. So Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering in place of his son. And Abraham named that son Adonai Yeresh, whence the present saying, Oh, the mount of the Lord, there is a vision.
Thank you, Gary. And let me read a few verses, beginning at verse 15. The angel of Adonai called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, By myself I swear, Adonai declares, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your favored one, I will bestow my blessing upon you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars of heaven and the sands on the seashore. And your descendants shall seize the gates of their foes. All the nations of the earth shall bless themselves by your descendants, because you have obeyed my command. Abraham then returned to his servants, and they departed together for Beersheba. And Abraham stayed in Beersheba. Sometime later, Abraham was told, Milcah too has borne children to your brother Nahor, Uz the firstborn, and Buz his brother, Kemuel the father of Aram, and Chesed, Hazo, Hildash, Ziplah, and Bethuel, Bethuel being the father of Rebekah. These 8 Milcah bore to Nahor, Abraham's brother, and his concubine, whose name was Reumah, also bore children, Ibah, Baham, Tahash, and Makkah. And that is our entire Torah portion for this week. Thank you very much, everyone, for the sharing of vocalizing of this sacred text. What I'd like to do is invite everyone, if you go on to mute for just a few moments, I'd just like to share a little bit of a focus study with you, and then I'll invite each of you to share some reflections and insights of what moved you and provoked you about this week's Torah portion. I've entitled this week's study session, The Shattering of Truth. And those who have a study sheet will see that I have a graphic at the very top. And that's of Abraham looking out from his tent, and he sees these 3 beings approaching his tent, which is, of course, how our Torah portion opens up. So I do want to turn back to the very beginning of the Torah portion to see what might be going on here, and what are some of the clues about what this week's Torah portion might be providing us in the way of a lesson. So our Torah portion opens up, and I've provided you with the Hebrew, says, Vayera Elav Adonai, which is translated as God appeared to him, meaning Abraham. And then the very next verse says, Vayar v'hine shlosha anashim. And he, Abraham, looked up and behold, 3 men, 3 beings. There is this fascinating transition from this singular character, God, which Abraham sees, and the next thing he sees in the very next verse is 3 beings. I want to suggest that what's happening here is the Torah portion is instructing us about what exactly is it that Abraham is seeing. He sees at first what we'll call the unified aspect of the divine presence, God in a singular form. And yet the very next thing that he experiences in terms of what he actually encounters is 3. It is this, the singularity of God now is appearing and actually encountering Abraham in the form of 3 beings. The one has now become shattered into 3. So I like to see how else this gets played out in terms of what I'll call this prismatic experience of the unity of God that Abraham is having. The infusion of the unity of God impacts Abraham, and he experiences it in this prismatic way where it gets refracted into multiple images. I want to suggest that this is in fact what Torah is trying to teach us about the nature of what we sometimes call truth. Torah is a very multi-purpose, I'm sorry, I'm not going to say it right, perspectival, thank you. Perspectival, there I go. So it is this refraction of truth, which is now what we're encountering in our Torah portion. The lesson that Torah as a whole is going to be teaching us is that truth is always partial. It's always fragmentary. And it's that insight has led to a Jewish culture that has always had a very subtle and complex understanding of the nature of truth. Let's see how that plays out in this week's Torah portion, this fracturing of what we sometimes call truth. So here in the narrative, we have God encountering Abraham and Sarah and saying, announcing to Sarah that she's going to bear a child. And we have in verse 18:12, says, Sarah laughed to herself, now that I am withered, am I to have enjoyment with my husband so old? That's Sarah expressing herself to God. Then God goes to Abraham and says, why did Sarah laugh? Why did she say, shall I in truth bear a child old as I am? That's not what Sarah said. Sarah said, my husband's so old. How can I possibly have a child? When God speaks to Abraham, God says, why did Sarah say, how could I, Sarah, bear a child when I, Sarah, am so old? God has, well, we could say God has lied. God has misrepresented the truth. Why? Why does God do that? Well, one possible way of understanding it is that God misrepresents what Sarah has said in order to not embarrass Abraham, not to transmit to Abraham something that his wife said that might have hurt his feelings, might have injured the relationship between Abraham and Sarah. We might call that a white lie. In fact, there is a principle that we find in the Talmud, which is discussed here in number 3. It's mutar l'shanot mipnei hashalom, which is roughly translated as mutar is permitted l'shanot, to change them mipnei, for the sake of peace. Really, it means it's permitted to change the facts for the sake of peace. It's a tricky principle to deal with. Under what circumstances is it okay to dissemble what the facts are, to alter the facts, to in fact lie for the sake of peace? Well, let's take a little bit further. Number 4 is also from the Talmud, and it's a story about a bride at a wedding. The custom was to say, "Oh, the bride is beautiful and graceful." Well, members of the school of Shammai, however, they weren't prepared to say so if in their eyes the bride was not beautiful and graceful, citing a verse from Torah which says, "Keep far from falsehood." So what we have here is apparently the house of Hillel, in opposition to the house of Shammai, they would go along with, the bride's very beautiful, and others said the bride's very beautiful, but the house of Shammai would say, well, no, she's not beautiful. Why should we tell a lie? So the principle that's operating here is a slightly different from the one that we encountered with Abraham and Sarah. Here, well, someone thought the bride was beautiful. At least the groom thought the bride was graceful and beautiful. So to praise the bride was not making an objective statement that could somehow be tested empirically. It was endorsing the groom's choice. And that was a way of celebrating the couple's happiness. Why should I substitute my judgment for the groom's judgment in this case if they have found beauty in one another's eyes? Who am I to dissemble? Who am I to make them see that, no, neither one of you is very beautiful? No, how could you have seen that? They have found love and beauty and happiness, and who are we to disturb that? We have another example of some kind of dissembling of the facts here, and yet some kind of reassembling of the facts a little bit later in our Torah portion in chapter 20, where we have Abraham and Sarah. They're encountering Abimelech, and Abraham says of his wife, "She is my sister." And then we discover that Abimelech says, "What do you mean? She's not your sister. She's your wife. Why did you do this?" And we have Abraham saying, it's a few verses later, "Well, actually, she is in truth my sister. She's my father's daughter, just not my mother's daughter. So she is kind of my sister, but it was the kind of relationship where it's okay for me to have married her as my wife. I just didn't provide you with the full story." So we have here in these opening chapters of our Torah portion, these examples where either facts are not being completely provided, or there are some facts that are being withheld, or there are aspects of what has been said that is now not being disclosed, or the words have been changed. So truth is something here that is being either played with, manipulated, withheld, or not being presented in the fullness of all the facts. What's fascinating is that after these episodes in the beginning of our Torah portion, we then have what we can think of as really the climax of the Torah portion, the Akedah Yitzhak, the binding of Isaac. That section starts off and I think it was Gary who read the beginning of that section, beginning of chapter 22. And the Hebrew reads this way, Vayhi achar hadavrim ha'elah, which here is translated as sometime afterward, Vayhi achar hadavrim, but really the Hebrew translates as, and it was after these things, these episodes, that God put Abraham to the test. So exactly what are these things, episodes, that then God puts Abraham to the test? I want to suggest it was these things, these events that we have just been talking about, where truth is either being played with, being misrepresented, not presented in its fullness. And it all began, as we remember, with Abraham first beholding God as a singular entity, a singular truth, and then literally encountering it in a prismatic way, where it's been shattered into more than one form. It seems that God is now ready to take Abraham on some kind of profound experience, now that he has, one, understood that there's more than the singularity of God that he will encounter. He has, two, had the episode of Sodom and Gomorrah, where Abraham has now raised up and defended other beings, unlike Noah, who was silent when God said, I'm going to wipe everything out. Noah was silent. Here, Abraham stands up for beings he has not even met. Abraham is saying, wait, really, you would destroy all the innocent people because there are some bad people there? Abraham is aware of the complexity of human existence. Abraham even seems to be aware of the complexity of divine existence. And that seems to be the character that God is now willing to take the next step in terms of Abraham's own evolution, his own growth, his own journey to becoming, if you will, a master of Torah, this way of life. So what is it that happens up in Mount Moriah? Let me do this. Let's do something a little different. At this point, if people want to unmute, I will ask anyone who'd like to give me in a very quick summary, just like a couple of sentences, what happened at Mount Moriah? Anyone want to describe what happened at Mount Moriah? Raise your hand. What happened? Yeah, Richard.
Well, I really don't know what happened, but I think of Hegel and Kierkegaard, that there is a teleological suspension of the ethical. We found out that Abraham knows the ethical rules and challenges God. But at some point, he recognizes there's something beyond ethics that needs attention here.
Okay, so let me just ask you. So I want to get the factually what happened. Did Abraham march up to Mount Moriah, knowing that he was supposed to be killing his son? What happened up on Mount Moriah? Was he about to kill his son, but he was restrained by an angel?
Well, you know, my view is that Isaac stopped him.
Okay, all right.
We all now are all waiting for Generation Z, who will be able to vote next time, will have seen this history unfold, and will be a little more farther along in creation and evolution than we are. And I think this testifies to that, because the kid has the wood on his back. That's a lot for a kid to carry. A big load is on Isaac, and it's his generations that are going to keep going. So I think that he had something to do with it. If I look at it, I think this is a fable, so I don't know about facts.
Okay, thank you. And I'm also trying to get to understand what happened there from what we see in the text. So anyone else say, what happened? Yes, David, and then Wayne.
Well, the superficial Bible school story is that Abraham and Isaac marched off, climbed up a mountain, and Abraham put Isaac on an altar and on some wood, and was about to kill him with a knife, and an angel, a messenger of God, or God him herself, stopped him and said, "Don't do it."
Okay.
And then Abraham saw a ram somehow trapped in the bushes, and so he sacrificed the ram instead. And then Abraham went back down. It's not clear what Isaac did after that.
Okay. So you're reading it as Abraham was ready to go through with this instruction to sacrifice his son, and an angel stopped him. Right?
Yes, that's
Okay.
the Bible story.
Okay. Wayne?
I'm not so sure I agree with that, but I think it's another story of blind faith, of following along. You know, we read with Noah. Noah builds his ark without asking very many questions of God, and just builds this ark. Takes over 100 years to do. I think Abraham would have followed through with sacrifice had no one interceded. But the thing that's always surprised me about this story, which we read every year on Rosh Hashanah, is what was the walk like back down the mountain, and why was it that Isaac didn't get really pissed off at his father and say, "What in the hell were you going to do?"
So you mean the walk back from
walk back from the mountain, the walk back home.
Who was walking back from the mountain?
Abraham and Isaac.
Abraham and Isaac.
I don't know that.
Okay.
It doesn't say that, but I think it's
Okay. All right. Go ahead, Margot. What happened then?
So Wayne said it was blind faith that Abraham had in God. I think it shows the blind faith that a child has to a parent. Because even though his father was approaching him with a knife, we don't hear of him struggling. Somehow or other, the child had blind faith in the father.
Okay. All right. I'm still grappling with what exactly happened up there, Susan. Yeah.
So there's a couple of things in the text that are kind of confusing. For one thing, Abraham tells the servants that they'll both come back.
Yeah. Why did he say
He's
that?
going to go up there and we're going to come back. And when Isaac asks him, he says, "Father, what are you going to sacrifice? Here's the wood. Here's we have everything, but not the sacrifice." And he said, "God will provide." So
You think he was lying to his son at that point?
I kind of think that Abraham was doing what was asked of him with the belief that he wasn't going to have to do it.
Okay.
But there are literally hundreds of millions of people around the world that think it was the blind faith story, and Abraham was going to sacrifice his son, and God stopped him.
Okay. Let me pick up some other people who want to share about what exactly happened in this story. Jackie, did you have something you wanted to offer?
Yeah, I agree with what Susan is saying. Just to play off of that, I think that in Abraham's mind, his faith in God was such, and the God that he believed in, I think he thought would not allow that to happen. And maybe the knife fell out of his hand. Maybe he believed that it was God telling him to drop the knife, but it was really his faith and his understanding of that God, that he felt that's what God would have him do, that he would not demand that of him.
Okay.
I don't think that he could have believed in a God that would demand that.
Okay. So far we've got a couple of versions of what happened there. Some people thought Abraham was going up there with the intent of carrying out this instruction to sacrifice his son, and then an angel intervenes and prevents him from doing so. Others say, oh, he believed that he wouldn't have to do that. We've got this issue about why did Abraham say to the servants that we'll be coming back when in fact he might have thought they weren't. We have the issue about why did he say to his son, Don't worry, God will provide for the sacrifice, will provide a sheep for a sacrifice. Dave, you want to join in with, tell us what happened there?
Okay, this is kind of what I've learned so far. Abraham is about to sacrifice his son Isaac. He doesn't want to do it. He's got the knife in his hand. His eyes are so teared up, he can hardly see what he's doing due to the tears and the emotion. He starts to raise his hand and the knife slips out of his hand. He no longer has the knife. And that's when the angel said, "Don't lay a hand."
Nice. Very nice. Okay, very nice, Kosvidi. Jay?
Well, first of all, it says that he lifted up the knife to slay his son. To slay his son. It didn't say he had some scheme. He went and lifted it up to slay it. When he said the two of us are going to come down, he obviously may have meant that I'm going to bring me and my son's remains down the hill so I can bury his remains. Because that would have been the two of them. I don't think he would have left them up on the mountain. And I think that, you know, when he said, God will see to the sheep for his burnt offering, you know, Abraham, I think, was doing was following God's direction. And I believe that I think he was rolling the dice with a lot on the pass line or whatever. I mean, this is it. For one thing, how much God had done for him up to this point.
Thank you.
And I think that he appreciated that and was ready to do this as a gift of, or as an expression of his allegiance or an expression of his thanks.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you. Couple more, Richard? Yeah.
Yes, just one more thing in regard to what we say about these men at the tent or these men at Lot's house, the refraction of God into three pieces. What about Abraham? Why can't we see Abraham as he went up there and he had a vision? Now, is this vision part of him? Is God acting through him? Is he seeing something in himself? Remember, it was Abraham that suddenly heard this voice and take these people out and, well, got to have a God here somewhere to help me out. What can I manufacture that's going to create some unity amongst this people? They came out of Egypt and all these different attitudes, and how do we unify our own psyche? That's what Moses' task was. And here's Abraham trying to unify the human psyche, and there's all these pieces that are going on. And he gets up there they do blood sacrifice for kids for fun, and maybe that's what I have to do because of the bargain I made. But he finally figures it out that no, we don't do this. He sees an angel. Well, how about these three guys? Why does he see three there? God is everywhere. God is in Abraham. So I think it's just Abraham and thou.
So this is obviously one of the richest stories that we have in Torah, that is also perhaps one of the most provocative of all the stories, that has drawn out of us as a tradition so many different perspectives about exactly what happened, why it happened. Was it an expression of Abraham's faith, a leap of faith? It has been called that he was going to go up there and either assume that God would never follow through on this, but was ready to stab this knife into his son if that's what it really was going to take. Where was Isaac at the very end? It doesn't say that Isaac came back down the hill with Abraham. So his absence there becomes another provocative element of the story about what happened to Isaac. Was he so traumatized that he went running down the other side of Mount Moriah away from his father? And then Dave Lee points out very beautifully a close reading of the text of what happens. Was his hand with a knife in it? Is that what was held back by the angels? There's a reading that says, it says he had a knife in his hand, and then when the angel said, stay your hand, that's an indication that his hand no longer had a knife in it, that Abraham had dropped it, perhaps from staring down at his son and saying, no, how can I kill my son? And so he dropped the knife. And that's when the divine voice speaks to him again, as if saying, that's right, you've dropped the knife. Now just lower your hand. You don't need, everything will be okay. So there are all these elements of the story that provoke us to wonder, what is this, an act of complete faith in God? Or, as perhaps Rashi reads the story as if Abraham is about to test God, rather than as much as God may be testing Abraham. Abraham thinking, wait a minute, God promised me that my descendants would be as great as the stars in the sky, as the sand on the shore. How could that be consequent with my killing my only son? There's something strange going on here. I'm going to test God's promise by going up that hill and seeing what's there. So there are all these elements to the story and all these different views about what's happening, why what's happening, that has produced all these different perspectives from which we learn different aspects of the nature of the story itself. I want to kind of wrap this around with a little bit of conclusion. The word truth, emet, in Hebrew, comes from the Hebrew verb aman, which means to confirm or support. And so we have the Hebrew expression ma'amin, I believe, which has to do with, so now truth, what we associate with truth is no longer just something that is presented to us, that exists objectively outside of ourselves. There's also some aspect of truth that involves us. And indeed, the same Hebrew that provides us the word emet also gives us the noun aman, which means artist. So there's some participatory creative aspect about truth, at least in the Hebrew language. So here, number 7 on this study sheet is a bit of a midrash. I'll share it with you. Rabbi Shimon said, when God was about to create Adam, the ministering angels split into contending groups. Some said, let Adam be created. Others said, let him not be created. That is why it is written, mercy and truth collided, righteousness and peace clashed, in Psalms. The Holy Blessed One took truth and threw it to the ground. The angel said, Sovereign of the universe, why do you do this? Let truth arise from the ground. Thus it is written from Psalms, let truth spring up from the earth. There is something here in this midrash that is, I think, that is indicative of the fact that in our understanding of the truth is not something that descends upon us, but is something that is created from the ground up. There is a way in which Judaism has avoided this, a more doctrinal, I would say, doctrinal approach to the nature of truth, and has given us more of a narrative sense of truth. Truth that is something that we construct, that is situational, that requires our participation. It's also something that's hinted at in last week's, in the previous Torah portion, where we read about the Tower of Babel. If you remember the Tower of Babel, which is everyone's cohering, speaking one language, and they are kind kind of cohering in this one group, and they're building this tower straight up. And eventually that's shattered, that's destroyed, because the Tower of Babel represents a kind of totalizing singular truth. What we learn in our tradition is that having a sense of monopoly about truth is what really leads to conflict. And the only way to live at peace is to realize that as finite human beings, we will never in this life achieve truth as it is in heaven. And the shattering of truth is not a tragedy, it's a gift. It's one that causes us to turn to one another, to be open to one another, to listen to one another, to share our different perspectives on what is present before us and what is happening, and in a sense, to share with one another the artwork that we're doing in trying to create a better world. So here's conflict resolution 101, which is the only way to really resolve conflict is to allow the other to inhabit you for some time in order to absorb their point of view. So I was talking with a friend earlier today who was remarking about how she couldn't understand how her sister could have voted for a different person for president of the United States. And I said, here's what you do. Call back up your sister and say, we're going to role play this out. I'm going to be someone who voted for Donald Trump, and I'm going to explain to you why I voted for Donald Trump. And now I want you to role play out someone who voted for Joe Biden for president, and you are going to explain to me why you voted for Joe Biden. When you fully inhabit the other's point of view, it allows you to have some sense of humility about your own point of view and some sense of compassion and empathy to the other person's point of view. That is so essential if you want to live together, and if you want to achieve some degree of not only resolving conflict, but if you want to engage in some kind of communal project together, creating community. It doesn't mean that you're going to agree on everything, but it means that you're open yourself up to the other. You have some degree of at least understanding why the other person is having that different point of view. So here's what happens with Abraham. Abraham opened himself up to seeing there's a multiple perspective on what we call the nature of God, what we call the nature of truth. This is what enables Abraham to be the first person in the Bible to stand up to God and say, why would you kill all the people of Sodom and Gomorrah without knowing what's going on? It's the one who, at least in the reading of Rashi, is the person who says, I'm going to challenge and test God to see, is this a God who's really intent upon child sacrifice? I'm going to challenge that notion. It's probably what inspired Abraham when he stared, as David mentioned so beautifully, when he stares into the face of Isaac, to drop the knife and say, this is a human being in front of me. No God could be worthy of killing another human being. This is the character that's now going to carry this heritage that we call Judaism forward, from which all of us are able to identify our heritage. So to open oneself up to a multiple point of view, to open oneself up to the possibility that there is some lesson to be learned from someone who has a completely different perspective on life than I do. And this is the humility that we need to carry forward in all of our relationships. And this is the only way that we can live in peace with one another, is to realize how finite we are and that we don't have a monopoly on the truth. I appreciate so much the perspectives, the insights that everyone has shared so far tonight. I want to respect our time together. So I will invite anyone who'd like to have a concluding comment to do so, and then we'll share in saying a little bit of a word of peace together. Yes, Margot.
As an aside, with regard to the horrible sin of incest, I remember as a university student in 1960 having a sociology professor shock the whole class, as he was shocked that 12 cases of incest have been reported in the city of Chicago. And it's such a large number. The naivete is, of course, there were many more, as we learned, in subsequent years. But in 1960, he was shocked that 12 cases had been reported. And of course, it's a terrible sin.
Thank you. That is shocking. Thank you. David?
I think what you're saying is that Abraham went up the mountain with his son and the sacrificial materials, trying to inhabit the point of view of Hashem. And but that wasn't really his. He still had his own self underneath there. And when he got to the top and started and reached and picked up the knife, Hashem had inhabited Abraham's point of view quietly in the background, and the intercession of the Malach, the messenger, the angel, the aspect of God, crying, Abraham, Abraham, was the moment where God found that middle place in between, where a place was found in between inhabiting both Hashem's point of view or place that Abraham was trying to inhabit, and Hashem trying to inhabit Abraham's place and being. And the dramatic conclusion is the eruption into the middle of those two, I don't know what you call it, but I'm coming from the perspective of how there is something holy that arises in the argument between two beings that are debating with each other in the method you describe, where you're trying to, for example, in the little exercise you talk about where you argue the other's point of view, it's a way of finding something in between that I believe, and Martin Buber says, is even more holy than anything else.
I think that's genius.
Go ahead, Richard.
Well, I want to say that I think that's absolutely genius. That's I and now together coming up with something. And I want to say that, Abraham's up there with Isaac, and the servants are down somewhere. So nobody's up there. And except our journalist who's writing this story. And it's a fable. It can be seen many, many ways. And we're given a fable to be able to deal with that ambiguity. And there's from our prayer book, from Siddur, it says, this is a vision of a great and noble life, to endure ambiguity and to make a light shine through it, to stand fast in uncertainty, to prove capable of unlimited love and hope, which means I had the same kind of conversation that you spoke about today with a friend. And the idea of being quiet and really listening and feeling what the other person is feeling and responding to that feeling and finding that you share the same set of feelings about what's going on and arrives at some tension which yields a common frame. And that's exactly what he's saying, I think, about God and Abraham about I and thou. So I think it's genius what he came up with.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Dave Lee?
Okay, I just wanted to add a little epilogue to the story I presented earlier. And that is after the angel said, don't lay a hand on Isaac, he runs up and embraces him. He's going from killing him to embracing him. And after he unties him, they kind of see this ram in the distance. And this is where Isaac gets up and runs off like a scared jackrabbit on the other side of the mountain. He runs back home. He runs back home to Sarah. And remember, it was Abraham who had to find a wife for Isaac. Was it under the direction of Sarah? Isaac is saying, I can't live here any longer or much longer. I've got to move out. End of story.
Thank you. And anyone else? Thank you, Dave. So, Tom? Oh, you have to unmute. You'll have to unmute, Tom.
Thought I was on. Okay, hi. After reading everybody's comments, on page 122 of my Torah, this person, Von Rad, said, one should renounce any attempt to discover one basic idea as the meaning of the whole. There are many levels of meaning. And I just heard it as we're doing these discussions. Everybody, and then, oh, I agree with Dave. I go Dave, and you know, everybody, and Richard, and there are a lot of different meanings.
So good.
Beautiful. Wayne?
Very, very quickly, when Abraham is negotiating with God about how God might spare Sodom and Gomorrah if they find a certain number of righteous people, and they start at 50 and then 45 and then 40, and Abraham's apologizing for negotiating. He knows he's probably going to piss off God if he pushes it too hard, but they end up negotiating at 10, and I wonder if that is where we got the notion of a minion.
Yes.
No, well, it's a nice idea. It's nice. Actually, it comes from a little bit later with the scouts. We'll see, and we'll talk about that. But so let me just wrap up what we've all been saying. One way of viewing the Binding of Isaac story, Abraham going up to Mount Moriah, is that he's going up as a man of faith, complete trust in God. That's not the way I read the story, and I want to suggest that's not quite the way Rashi seems to be reading the story. Rather than a man certain about what's going to happen up there and being fully trusting of God, Abraham goes up there not certain and slightly questioning and challenging of God. And that seems to be what allows to have this ultimate experience of revelation, because the mistrust, if you will, causes Abraham to then look deep into the eyes of his son underneath him, and causes him to then drop the knife and say, whatever is going to happen, I'm not going to kill my son. So it's that notion about to not be a zealot. Judaism is, thank God, thank all of us, relatively free of zealotry. It has never been a particularly praiseworthy characteristic within our tradition. But the primary document that the rabbis have left us, the Talmud, is not one of zealotry. It is one of argumentation and questioning, while simultaneously respecting all these different opinions that the rabbis address and encounter. So it's my hope and prayer for all of us as we engage upon the artistic work of creating greater peace among all of us, that we realize the wonderful rich heritage that we have of having this multi-perspective approach, this beautiful prismatic approach to see all these colors, to see how much we have to learn from one another. And that's the way we construct what we call truth. That's the way we construct a greater sense of peace. By opening ourselves up to one another, by having a sense of being vulnerable to one another's opinions and points of view. That's the way we create a place of beauty and peace and truth. Thank you all very much for coming together. I look forward to our next encounter. Be well, everyone. Thank you so much.
Toda
Shabbat
rabah.
shalom.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Be well, everyone.
Be well.
Bye-bye.
Bye.